Hello everybody and welcome to the Aviation Show, brought to you as always by the fabulous Pima Air and Space Museum, but we're not there because you might hear from my voice. I'm really excited because we are at the Beechcraft Heritage Museum here in Tennessee with Charles Parish, who's the president of the museum, and I'm so excited to be here. And I've been giggling away about what we're going to see, but normally we start these by talking about you, Charles. Okay. But you just showed us the drawers. You got ahead of yourself, so we're going to dive straight in, really. Well, as we get going, we'll talk about you. But the Beechcraft Heritage Museum has an incredible collection, not only of aircraft, but you've got the drawings as well, haven't you?
Right. We have the drawings of all the early Beechcraft Staggerwings all the way through the G model, which is the last model of the post-war Staggerwing. So just pull a drawer out. I'm a little embarrassed how this is organized, but we plan to work a little harder on that in the future. But just for instance, look at all these original drawings from Beech. On different front stabilizer spar, and it just as an example, just all kind of exhaust stacks. These were all done with slide rule, and this is all handwritten. We didn't have computers in those days to do those things for us. Yeah, you can see the logo.
Even the logo is hand done.
And if you'll notice, that particular drawing is 12/31/1936. Just an example of what's in here. So.
So when
pretty amazing.
When you've got heritage in the title, you mean you really have the heritage of the company right here?
Well, we've just actually had some folks that are very close to Beechcraft through the years say that Tennessee is now the home of Beechcraft because of the heritage, the history, and the preservation of that history is right here in Tennessee. So Textron, of course, owns Cessna and Beech. They're busy making new airplanes. They're busy. They're a corporation. Yeah. But we're the guys that kind of can help be in the background, collecting some of the history, and they're very appreciative of that. Matter of fact,
that's great.
It kind of reminds me of the Harley Davidson Museum with the Harley Davidson motorcycles in Milwaukee. We try to really capture all the history of Beech since 1932, and actually prior to that with the Travel Air company in the 20s.
So this is kind of a family affair, really, is it? Because it was your parents who were part of the group that decided that there needed to be a museum.
Right. My father got interested in the Staggerwing early on in the late mid-60s. Don't know how dentaileded you want me to get into this, but anyway, ended up buying a Staggerwing. There was a Staggerwing club. There was a group of enthusiasts.
Just to interrupt you better close this, because when you turn your back, I might put something in my pocket.
that enjoyed, owning Staggerwings. This is the late 60s, so the airplane was, the last one was probably only 30, 25 years old at that time. Now we're talking 80 years old, But the group decided there ought to be a museum to foster and preserve the heritage of the Beechcraft brand as well as the Staggerwing itself. So they started the Staggerwing Museum, and my mom and dad had some property here on the Tullahoma Airport in Tullahoma, Tennessee, and said, hey, we'll let you have the property. Why don't we start there, and then we'll oversee it. And there was a lot of folks involved in this happening. I don't want it to be perceived that the Parish has built this. This was the Parishes and a whole lot of other real enthusiasts with a lot of money or a lot of time that put into this organization. It just happens to be here in Tullahoma.
I'm very envious of your dad. Yeah. So I like Staggerwing. I'm going to have one. Back in the day when you could do that quite straightforwardly compared to now.
Well, he was a builder and a creator kind of guy. We ran a sporting goods company here in the community. That was his day job, and aviation was his passion. And he liked flying airplanes, but he also liked building things and creating things and doing things for other people. And we knew this. He knew this would be and many others knew this would be a great cause and would be well worth it on into the future. So that's how that's why we're here, I guess.
Yeah. And you, how did you get into the game?
Well, I grew up around airplanes. You'll see a few airplanes today that my brothers and I fly now. But we were just kids going to Oshkosh, what they called it Oshkosh at that time, and now Air Venture, and now we're flying the airplanes to the event. So some people grow up around boats and horses or whatever. I grew up around airplanes. So I've just been around it all my life.
May I?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because
I don't know what else is in here.
No, it's files and blueprints and.
Yep. This is a rendition of the very first Staggerwing. Let me try to pull it out of there. The 1932 model 17R Staggerwing with the fixed gear. People don't know this, but this actually had a retract system where the tire goes up into the wheel fairings.
Reduced drag quite a bit, and yeah, brilliant. Okay, we have airplanes to see.
Yeah.
So as much as keep me away from those, Charles. I'm going to do it because one of my aviation heroes was in the group that helped found the museum, and she has her own part of the museum as well in Louise Thaden, doesn't she? She
sure does. Yeah, her family donated, or actually put on loan to us to keep indefinitely a lot of her artifacts. And she was one of the early founders that said, "Hey, we ought to start this museum." And then some other people like Jim Gorman and Dick Hansen, and I could go on and on. And most of these guys were successful business people. And I should point this out. They knew that when we started a museum, it was going to be very hard to maintain it and keep it moving forward. A lot of things, great big ideas, but who follows it through? Who keeps it going? And your finances are absolutely important to maintain, to be able to preserve this on into the future. So some good business folks helped us put together a business plan that has paid off.
That's
now we're a little over 50 years old. So,
well, shall we wander over?
Sure,
and
sure.
Well, as we walk, do you want to just sort of give, if you want to go behind us, Ellie, because then you don't have to.
Hey, scan over here, Ellie, real quick. This is a picture of Mr. Beech with Charles Lindbergh. This is him early on with a Travel Air with the Curtiss OX5 engine. That's the early A-17 that had the great big 600 horse Wright on it. Mr. Beech on the sitting on the wing of a Staggerwing G model, one of the post-war Staggerwings.
Of course, the formidable Mrs. Beech.
And absolutely, because we'll talk about her quite a bit.
Because she's another one of my aviation heroines. Just her story in itself is quite something.
Absolutely, you know, she was one of the first female top executives in the country at the time. Really, if you think about it. And Mr. Beech passed away in 1950, and she started running the company. So. Actually, to this day, when we make decisions, should we do something or not do something, we always ask ourselves, would Mrs. Beech approve of that decision? So that's how ingrained she is with us.
Fantastic. So I guess, as we wander over, would you mind giving us a little potted history of the Beeches and Beechcraft? Because it doesn't start with Beech Aircraft itself, it starts with Travel Air.
Well, with that said, it's a little bit of a walk, but let's go to one of our first hangars and our first early hangars, which is the Walter Beech hangar.
Okay.
So follow me, if you would, please. This is an art gallery we have of all original art. Of course, Mr. Beech and Mrs. Beech. One of my favorite photographs, this is Mrs. Beech and Louise Thaden here in Tennessee in 1976. Really pretty iconic photo. And they were pretty polar.
That's quite some suit Louise is wearing as well.
Right.
They're quite a colourful pair, you say?
Yes. Well, she was elegance, and Mrs. Beech was sort of represented elegance, and Mrs. Thaden, she was a go-getter, a tough, almost tomboyish in a way. You know, I hope nobody's offended by me making that comment, but you think about some of the things she did early on, racing those other pilots.
And the long distance flight. And anyone who wants to stay in a tiny two-seat biplane for, what was it, 47 hours or something?
Something to that nature on one of her.
Yeah. Check out our episode with with Keith about that, whose book is in the bookshop. I'm pleased to see. But
that's an early photo of our founders. A lot of them are deceased now, but some aren't. And that's the front of the log cabin. And we'll talk a little bit about it in just a second. So, come on in. So when we first started in 1973, we started out with a log cabin. That was our office and Mrs. Thaden's library and artifacts. We started out very, very small and began to grow through the years. Our second edition was the Walter Beech hangar, which you're seeing now. So that was in 1975. So some of the early Travel Airs. This is actually serial number 1 Travel Air with the Curtiss OX5 engine that's on loan to us from EAA.
So I guess we should say, because for a certain type of aviation geek, Travel Air is one of the founding American companies, isn't it? But its name's kind of fallen into the ether for a lot, hasn't it? Because
maybe so, because Lloyd Stearman, Clyde Cessna, and Walter Beech all went off to do their own ventures.
And when you mention those three, that's quite a sort of brain drain from the company, isn't it?
But those were the 3 founders of the Travel Air Company. And then, of course, in 1932, to the left of me over here, Mr. Beech and Mrs. Beech founded Beech Aircraft Company, corporation actually, and created the very first Staggerwing, and this is it. Serial number 1.
This is Staggerwing number 1.
If you'll recall, we showed a drawing in there in my office that had a photo of it.
And there it is.
Yeah.
And we're talking, how far between Travel Air number 1 and
1925, 1932.
Yeah. So less than 10 years, we've gone from something that to most people you'd say was quite rudimentary to something people would recognize as a very modern aircraft.
Well, if you think about it, they took the pilot and the passengers, put them inside the aircraft, which is much more comfortable than being in an open cockpit biplane, and just made it much more comfortable for all, actually.
I'm just going to have a little peek inside the door, because this is sort of, as much as it's going to be nice chatting to you, Charles, this is the reason I've come.
Okay.
Look at that finish. Good amount of chrome in there as well. So when the Beeches release this or announce that this is their first aircraft of their new company, what sort of reaction did it get at the time?
Well, most of their clients at the time were oil companies, corporations that had executives. They wanted to be able to get them out. For instance, oil companies, they wanted to get them out in the field, maybe to the oil fields. They needed an aircraft that could land on not necessarily perfect conditions. So they'd land on roads, the gravel roads and what have you. And this was a perfect airplane to do that. But obviously you can see in the back, the executive was a very comfortable situation here.
And something that the Beechcraft aircraft have always kept along the way, isn't it?
Right.
I remember flying in.
He knew he wanted a luxury brand. Yeah. He wanted to be the top luxury brand of the aircraft industry. And
so I guess that's key, isn't it? So they're going for that niche market at the top at an interesting time, I suppose. Was it 30, 32?
32.
So it's Depression times. Mm-hmm. You'd think it was a strange time to start pitching an expensive executive aircraft.
Yeah, they had some rough times early in the Beech years because of that, but they worked hard and managed to make the program work.
So the development of the aircraft from this, which is just stunning, we go from fixed undercarriage, like we're saying, slight retraction into the fairings on there. We're on the wrong side of the airplane to show that, aren't we? I'm just going to touch it so I can say that I touched it. Oh, I'll get in trouble. I'll clean it later.
Yeah, that's fine.
So slight retraction on the undercarriage, but still reasonably straightforward biplane design. Why the Staggerwing, I suppose, is a question to throw at you. Is it just a design aesthetic, or is there something to it?
Actually, there are a couple of reasons. One, he decided to do the Staggerwing because when they tested and flew the airplane, they noticed that when the one wing, the lower wing section would stall, the upper wing would still be flying and vice versa. So it had a very docile stall to the characteristics of flight. Also, with the upper wing toward the back, the pilot could see out better and could see up through the sky. If you can imagine, if you're sitting in the back of an open cop biplane and your wings ahead of you, it's very hard to see, your path of where you're going for other aircraft or birds or whatever. So it was designed for visibility as well.
So it's an executive aircraft, so you want it to be smooth, you want it not to be catching anybody out, spilling the drinks, we'd say nowadays. But then good visibility, which makes it safer. And then, of course, they just keep iterating on it and go fully retractable, which I suppose speeds it up a good chunk.
Well, serial number 3, they decided to go to the retract system. And, that was way ahead of its time in the mid-30s. And so you could see the example of a retract system. Very complicated system, actually, but works very nicely. And they use basically the same system all the way up to in the mid-40s when they ceased production of the Staggerwing, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
This is, what a terrible place to work, John. So you've got them iterating on the design. I suppose, at what point do they decide that they need to do something big to help promote the aircraft and bring Louise Thaden in for the Bendix? What's that? I know I'm jumping ahead, but I've seen the trophies. I would love to mention Louise because it's an interesting group. You've got Mr. Beech as the designer. You have his wife getting more and more involved in the company as well, Olive Ann. And then you have Louise Thaden, who has been excluded from the big cross-country race for many, many years. Right. And you have a new, sleek, fast airplane that needs a sales bump, I suppose.
Right. Well, it's almost like in today, NASCAR, all your major brands want to have a car in the race and to promote and push their brand. Same thing then. Everybody was jockeying for the better design, the faster design, the more easier to fly design. And so that, yes, they wanted to get involved in the race aspect of aviation to get a name for themselves. Best way to promote their brand.
Yeah.
So.
And I suppose we'll come back to what happens then a little bit later.
Okay.
Because we'll end up in there and we'll talk about that race. But here's the mystery ship, which I'm intrigued to ask, because this isn't Poncho Barnes's one, but she had a similar one, didn't she?
She did. Yeah. Yes, she raced one. There were 7 of them built. There was a Texaco. You can see the original wings in the corner there of the Texaco Travel Air. It's my understanding that they had 2 sets of wings. They had race wings and cross-country wings. And that's why that these particular wings were not on the aircraft when it was either destroyed or damaged. And so we have those intact as they were from back in the late 20s.
So are those ones race wings or cross-country wings?
I think those are the cross-country wings.
Okay. So I guess slightly bigger chord, better for...
Yeah, that's something I'm not real clear on exactly.
That's all right. That's me asking questions that I don't know the answer to either. So. Yeah. But it's just that racing pedigree, isn't it? That Mr. Beech has got going through it. And I guess, as you're saying, it's the sales window. How else would you sell aircraft in the day? Because I guess people think of Reno and the National Air Races today as a quirky little thing. In the 20s and 30s, the National Air Races were huge, weren't they?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it was a proving ground. I think at the time we kind of felt that things were a little uneasy around the world and that we needed to improve upon our aerodynamics, speed, We wanted to go faster. We wanted to get, climb higher. And they were always pushing the envelope, as we do today with SpaceX. I look at a lot in the same comparison. And other interesting, it's entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
It's not the government behind a program. It's actually the good capitalistic system working to promote and improve on how we advance aerodynamics and aviation. So,
and it's interesting. I'm just looking at the lines. There's certain shapes that you can see designers carrying forward on them, and there's a lot of sort of similar lines, especially around the tail, that you can then see on the Staggerwings as well. So he's using what he knows, keeping the stuff that works, and moving forward. It's I'm being a terrible interviewing because I'm screaming like a little child. I'm so happy right about now. The Pima Air and Space Museum in Tucson, Arizona is home to one of the largest non-government funded aviation and space museums in the world. Featuring nearly 400 aircraft, the museum is home to an incredible collection like NASA's NB-52 X-15 dropship and 747 SP Sophia Airborne Observatory, to a wealth of rare military types from air forces all around the world, to the first production 777. Whether you're a military or civilian aviation geek, there will be an incredible aircraft around every corner of this epic 80-acre site for you to explore. As the Aviation Show's partnership with the Pima Air and Space Museum enters its third year, we're delighted to say that Pima is truly a top of your bucket list museum to visit. And it keeps getting better, as this year the Tucson Military Vehicle Museum will be opening right next door. To find out more about the incredible collection and the fantastic events coming up at the Pima Air and Space Museum, and of course the Tucson Military Vehicle Museum, head over to www.pimaair.org to plan your trip to one of the world's great aviation collections, and one that now includes tanks next door, if that's your sort of thing. What about we'll call it the green one to get this one in, because what's the story behind this aircraft?
Well, it's serial number, let's see, I can't remember exactly what serial number this is. This would be 100. So interesting maybe point about this aircraft is it became first produced for civilian and then later was taken into military service and used by the Civil Air Patrol to patrol the eastern seaboard for U-boats. And then it was returned, after the war, returned back to civilian use. And so that's sort of the significance of this particular airplane here. A really nice family that's involved with the museum and helped found the museum as it is today. The Chinquette family from Maine donated it back in the, I believe it was the 80s.
Sorry, the reason I have my phone out, because you had the price on your information board there, and I was just going to put the price in to see what it would have been in 1937.
I
for
believe,
this one,
yes.
yeah. Because, dear listener, the $9,900 that this would have cost you originally, in modern money, just the cool $220,000 today. Which, to be fair, isn't bad.
No, actually, that's kind of in line with what you would think today.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's
actually maybe a little cheaper. An airplane like this today would be, in comparison, maybe $1 million airplane. You know, I don't know.
So you're saying this one did civilian air patrol. We have a few Staggerwings in the UK. A couple of them are aircraft that served in the RAF during the Second World War as sort of, again, as executive shuttles and things. When it gets into wartime, how does the Staggerwing fare? Does it just do that sort of executive role again? Because there's the picture of them lined up in
exactly.
the Air Force
The
colours
majority
over
of the D model and the majority of Staggerwings actually went into production during the war effort and were used by the Navy and the Army as you said, dignitary transportations and transport. So, and then of course when they came out of military active duty, civilians purchased them, restored them, Typically, they needed some restoration because they're wooden fabric, and put civilian paint schemes on the fuselage.
It's always good to have a star, isn't it? You get the nice stuff.
There was 781, I'm real close, Staggerwings built from 32 to 46. So pretty rare airplane, and I get the question a lot, how many are still flying today, and nobody knows exactly what that answer is, but it's probably just maybe north of 50 or so.
It's still a good number.
Yeah, pretty good, yeah.
And I guess that comes down to the rugged construction of the aircraft, the fact that it can be restored, refabricated reasonably easily. Reasonably easily. He says, if you gave it to me to do, I'd probably fabric my own hands to the aircraft. But
well, that's another nice thing about the museum. We're a resource to be able to assist people during restorations. And you'll see an aircraft in a little while when we go into one of our other hangars that shows a Staggerwing without the cover on it, without the fabric on it, I should say. And so it's used by people that had no idea that airplanes were ever fabric airplanes. They only know them as metal. Or for the person that's restoring one to say, oh, okay, that's where that went. That's how that was put together. And in some cases, as I showed you, we have a lot of the drawings and some parts. We're really not a parts supplier, but we can assist sometimes with restorations, and at least a resource for them to come and discuss with us what they need, how they're trying to look. The Staggerwing Club is still in existence, and it's also a great technical resource for Staggerwing enthusiasts.
So there's a good community keeping these things in the air.
Pretty good, yes. I'd have to admit, for an airplane this rare, yes.
I've been looking forward to seeing the naked Staggerwing. I've been Googling and looking at all the pictures for you guys.
When I was a kid, we would have anywhere from 30 to 35 Staggerwings show up at that time Staggerwing convention. Now we call it the beach party, and we had 13 that were here this last year. That's pretty good in 2024 to have that many Staggerwings.
I think we're gonna have to come back for the beach party.
You would enjoy it. I promise you would.
Right, where do we go next, Joel?
Let me just show you this in here. This is interesting.
It's a mystery ship. Sorry. Again, Louis Hayden, Pancho Barnes, all of these sort of connections coming up in one place. You're making me very happy. Not that was her aircraft, of course, dear viewer, before you start mentioning it in the comments. But
this is the OA Beech Gallery. It's dedicated to Mrs. Beech, and a lot of her memorabilia is around the walls and on display up front. And if you'll notice, there's a kind of a baby blue motif to everything. She was a huge baby blue fan. Most of the aircrafts that she traveled in when she was working at Beechcraft had some baby blue interior or blue on the outside of the aircraft. Very elegant lady. Some of this furniture was out of her actual office in Wichita when she was running Beechcraft Corporation.
And that's the very famous photo of her with
the board of directors, right?
Yeah. And a rare woman in that sort of position of control of an aircraft, I suppose of any company in this sort of period. So it goes to the character of the woman. Tough broad, I suppose.
Absolutely.
This is that's the portrait over there on the left is the sort of famous one that you see reproduced quite a bit, isn't it?
Right.
Of the earlier days. So what sort of events would you put on in here?
Yeah, meditation room. We have some different services. We have board meetings, possibly. During beach party, we have different seminars, that type of thing. But
fantastic, lovely space.
If you'll notice, a lot of the hand-hewed logs, those particular logs actually came off the property and were done, were produced or hand-hewed when we built this building, using the same design or the same construction, chipping away the wood as in the 1870s they did. The log cabin we have was actually German immigrants built that back in the late 1800s. And it came off a farm just real close from here to here. And so we used the same kind of concept, but kind of interesting.
Because this part of Tennessee does have that sort of German connection, because a number of the distilleries all have German founders and things. I remember, this my other reason for coming to Tennessee was, of course, to try your lovely whiskies.
Yeah.
Well,
are you going to have time to do Jack Daniels?
We're going to see how much time I have left after Ellie pries me away from your collection here.
Okay.
But yeah, that was, come visit you, music and Nashville as well. But
a lot of photos on the wall are early photos of inside the Travel Air factory. They're putting the fabric on a 6000 in this photo right here. Other Pete Hill, who was one of the early Staggerwing test pilots and flew at corporate, have his pilot's license at the time. It's called a certificate now, but just lots of interesting artifacts and memorabilia from the day.
Just look at Walter Beech builds new type cabin biplane here, Wichita paper. Oh, brilliant.
Beechcraft was really ahead of their time in with most production and design, even to this day. We'll see some other examples of that as we walk around.
Because they also, as fantastic and as ahead of the time as Staggerwings, they also built another very famous executive aircraft as well in partnership with Mr. Rusan, wasn't it?
Yeah, the Starship.
Yeah, well, don't spoil it. We'll get to that in a bit.
I think it's interesting to point out that early on we didn't have a tail wheel, we had tail skids. That's the way they came out of the factory. It was also used as sort of a braking system. And that's an example of one of the early tail skids. Some of the tools that the employees used, these were actually given to us by a Travel Air, or actually early Beech employee. And so his personal tools he donated to the museum back in the 70s. So pretty interesting.
Very recognizable to anyone who's worked on furniture or like high-end varnishing. I'm looking at a friend of mine did French polishing and veneers, and he had those sorts of things. He's sadly not with us anymore, but he would always geek out about good quality woodworking tools.
One of the things that we kind of pride ourselves in doing of recent is sort of exhibits or mini museums within the museum. For instance, we have this partially taken apart OX5 where you can see how the engine looks on the inside, and how it's put together, the different parts. Water-cooled V8. So
it's the OX5 is the same as in Travel
That's
Air
correct.
1.
It's on there now.
Yeah. So we can have a look at the engine and then see what the installation would be like on the early aircraft. That's brilliant, yeah. Right, where to next?
Let's take a look at Mrs. Staden's.
Yes.
Well, you mentioned the trophies. That might be a good time to show those.
Yeah, it's that top one I've been excited to see.
Yeah.
Because there it is, the 1936 Bendix.
Yeah, Mr. Beech asked Louise Staden if she would participate in the race and fly his airplane, the Staggerwing, and she did, and they won the race in 1936.
I'm just jumping in because that's the Powder Puff Derby Trophy, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. It's the Women's Air Derby Trophy. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which
1920.
I'm using the derogatory term for it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Right. 1929. Yeah. She did that in a Travel Air.
Mm-hmm. But the 36 race is extraordinary, and I want to say surprise at her arrival first was quite something. I'm just trying to remember, I meant to look this up for him. There's a fantastic newspaper clipping, I think it's from the Los Angeles Times, which is like woman arrives first, and you can almost sort of read the sort of surprise and shock of that as well. But yeah, I've been so excited to see that trophy because
And we have her actual pilot's license number 74 in our collection, and Orville Wright's signature is on that document. So that's interesting to have in our collection.
there you go. Push that up and get in on Mr. Wright's signature there on the left. And to be fair, that's a pretty good license picture.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just sort of think I've got my passport in my pocket, and it's embarrassing to show that to anybody. But yeah, if you're gonna, back in the day when you could have a good studio shot to go on your license. But I suppose I'm geeking hard right now because I find Louise Thaden the most remarkable pilot, not only for the racing, but then for the marking work that she did with putting a town name, flying around, putting the town, marking out where the town names could go to help navigation and things like that, and in between these two times, and then just her relationships as well, the people that she knew, the founding of the 99s, just a remarkable woman. And then at Beech, you have a counterpart as well in Mrs. Beech that makes this company really quite forward-looking.
Exactly. You know, she set more records, altitude records, speed records, won more races than like Amelia Earhart, who has the notoriety that she does now by the mystery of what happened to her. But as far as accomplishments, Louise Thaden was far surpassed. Louise Thaden's accomplishments surpassed.
Because they're letters that you can read between Louise and Amelia, especially on that last trip when Thaden said, "Don't do it. You don't need to do it."
Yeah.
And she said, "I have to." And it breaks the heart, considering when you look back and you know what happened. Because friends and rivals always make for interesting people in their correspondence. Exactly. But oh wow! As an interviewer, I'm doing poorly because I'm just looking at that, just sort of jumping up and down, going, I finally get to see it after reading about that race so much. And
it's also fun to show you this as it is now, because we have a major improvement to this exhibit on the radar. We hope to get completed in the next year. That's going to better display all of her artifacts, and so we're always improving, always doing something at the museum to improve things and make it more likable. We also like that if someone comes this year and they come back next year, they're going to see a change, a difference.
What do you have planned, if you mind me asking?
We would like to completely redo this office and out in the area where we were standing a second ago with new displays, and improve the way we display the information about her and Beechcraft itself. And actually the history of our organization now. We're over 50 years old, as I mentioned.
What picture do we have up here? Because this is Wichita Girl Sets Air Mark.
Well, she set it in a Travel Air in 1928, one of her altitude records. And I can't recall exactly at what altitude let's see, it probably says here. I can't recall, but you can see her.
I'll stick it up along the bottom, Charles, when I do the edit.
Yeah, okay. And it was quite the feat.
Oh yeah, and there's her with her oxygen tank, and I'm. You could leave me in here for hours, and I'd be quite happy. So, Bendix Race Trophy, WIA All Women's Air Carnival, Spot Landing Contest. We're recording. So, Charles, you're saying this is the picture of Louise and Blanche after winning the Bendix?
Correct. Taxiing in to Bennett Field. Just wanted to make sure you captured that photo. And
that is. Then there's the 99's Award of Achievement for.
Well, as you said, she did. She was one of the founders of the 99's.
who I hope to speak to someone from. So if anyone from the 99s is watching this, talk about what they're doing now as well is quite something, because they are still a very busy organisation, aren't they? Oh, there's her Civilian Air Patrol wings in there as well. Oh, this is just fantastic.
Yeah, this is a photo of Louise when she was here in Tennessee in 1973. So as you can see, she visited 73, 74, and 75. I think 75 was her last time that she was here. Wonderful lady. I enjoyed getting to know her. I was fairly young at the time, but very pleasant.
I wasn't going to presume to see if you were around in those days.
Oh, yeah.
That'd have been rude. So yeah, I suppose, what was she like when she was back here, especially on the fly-ins and things? Is
just a down-to-earth person. She there was no arrogance, no air of, do you know who I am about her. She was just a wonderful, nice, pleasant person to be with. But you could tell that she had a real go-get-it attitude. You know, she made things happen and had an adventurous spirit for sure.
Like I said, I keep mentioning, whenever I get a chance to squeeze her into after you into a conversation, I always do, because she's just the most remarkable lady.
Why don't we, are we still recording?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
We're just rolling.
Let's walk down to the other hangar, and then we've got one more up here. We'll take a look in just a second. We can head down and see some of the more modern aircraft.
Can we just say how nice it is not to be freezing up north? It was cold.
This is a little bit unusual for February in Tennessee to be this mild.
Be sure to join us next week as we return to the Beechcraft Heritage Museum to check out some of the more modern Beechcraft in the collection, including the fantastic Starship, a naked Staggerwing, and of course, the Parish family's very own Staggerwing that Charles himself learned to fly on. Of course, if you can't wait and want to see part 2 straight away and ad-free, join us on Patreon, where you can get goodies at the moment that include logos, stickers and keychains, all from just £3 a month plus a bit of VAT on the bottom tier. Join us, it's a lot of fun, and until next week, thank you for joining us. I'd like to say thanks to all of our fantastic supporters over on Patreon. If you head over to our Patreon page, you can join the fun from just £3 a month plus a bit of VAT, get your name in these very credits, and get all the episodes ad-free and early as soon as I get the edit finished. The Aviation Show is hosted and produced by Matt Bone and is a Boney Abroad production.